Hey everyone, Dan here with the Hardly Brief Dev with the final part in our series where we create a day-night cycle inside Unreal Engine using blueprints. If you haven't watched the last couple of videos, be sure to check them out. The link will be at the top of this video. In the last two parts, I discussed the design of a game time system, and we talked about how we could implement a central game time system by creating a reusable actor component and attaching it to a custom game state class. We created the component and we implemented added functionality to better control our game time. Lastly, we created an event so other actors or objects in our project could actually respond to game time changes. In this final part, we're going to see how we can use events, like we did in the last video, to trigger a simple day-night cycle lighting effect. We'll use a timeline, which is something new we haven't talked about yet, to manage light color transitions. And lastly, we'll tie in the game time speed modifier to speed up and slow down the transition. But before we jump into the editor and finish building our day-night cycle, don't forget the project files are available to download on my Patreon. If you're new to Unreal Engine and you want to learn more, I do have a free course on Udemy that is perfect for new developers or those getting started at Unreal. Be sure to check out my latest video on JetBrains Rider. It's now free for non-commercial use, and it's the perfect time to jump in to start learning C++ as part of your Unreal Engine development. All of those links and more are in the description below. Please like and subscribe for more content, and please let me know in the comments what do you want to know or learn next. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're back inside the day-night cycle project, and I have the BP game time component open, which is where we've added all the functionality to keep track of our time and then to manage our time and to change the speed. We left off in the last video where we actually created a new game time day event that fires, and in that we have our custom game state class that we have attached our game time component to, and in this we are actually listening for the on new game day event that fires from our time component. So what we'd like to do is use the same kind of concept where we create an event that something listens to that event and then responds accordingly. And what we want to do is actually change the lighting of our scene, which will create a day-night effect. So that's what we're going to start off with. So to get started, the first thing that we want to do is go down to our content drawer. In the blueprints folder, I'm going to right click and we're going to create a new blueprint class. We're going to create an actor, and we want to call this BP Day Night Manager. You can name this whatever you want, but it's going to be a actor that's going to sit in our third person map. So what I'm going to do is just click this and drag it into our world. It's not going to have anything, any physical presence. It's just going to be an actor inside the world. Double click to open this up, and it opened on my other monitor. But here we have just a empty class or blueprint actor. What we want to do is go inside the event graph. And the first thing that we need to be able to communicate with our game time system is a reference to our BP game state. So in begin play, what we're going to do is first say get game state. This will give us the game state instance, but what we need to do is cast it to our BP game state. So I'm going to say cast to BP game state. I'll connect the begin play pin to the cast node. If this cast is successful, we want to save our BP game state into a local variable for this actor. So I'm going to click off this and say promote to variable. We can name it game state, like so. And now what we can do is bind to an event, but we need to create the event that we want to bind to. So that's what we're going to do next. Go back inside the BP game time component. And under event dispatchers, what we'd like to do is create a new event, and we're going to say on new, we'll say on game time evening. You can label this whatever you want, but this is just to show you how it's going to work. I'm going to click and drag this into our event graph, and near the hours, so near here, we're going to say call. So now that we've created this, what we want to do is check to see if hours, after we increment it, is equal to a certain value. And we want to do this before this Boolean branch. So what I'm going to do is drag off this plus symbol. We're going to do another branch node. I'm going to click and drag this off to the right-hand side, move this up into place. Whether or not this is true or false, we do want to go ahead and call the branch. I'm going to disconnect the true one for now. And what I'd like to do is say equals We'll connect the output of hours to this. If it equals, we'll say 1700, so 17, right? Because our time is in military time, 0 to 24. We'll connect that to our node. If this is true, we want to go ahead and call this event. And then we'll go ahead and check if it's greater than 24. If it's false, we'll continue on. And we'll move this up there for clarity. So now that we have this new on game time evening event, we can go back into our day night manager. And after we have gotten our reference to game state, we can get access to the game time component. So we're going to say get game time component. From here, you can either save this reference or we'll just use it here. What we can do is we're just create a new, we want to bind to the event we just created. So we'll say bind to on game time evening. From here, we're going to say create event, and we'll select a function and we'll say create matching event, and we'll say on game time evening. And here's where we're going to add the lighting effect. All right, so back inside the day night manager, what we want to do is create a timeline. The timeline is going to enable us to actually control how fast our sun sets or rises. And so the best way to do this is right click and say add timeline. This is going to create a new node and we can label it as sunset timeline. And the thought here is that this timeline, when you double click and open it up, actually allows us to create a track. In this case, we can create a float track or color track. It's really up to us. And this is basically a graph that you can create and customize how quickly and the shape, the easing of the lighting effect that we want to create will occur. So before we actually dive into that though, we want to talk a little bit about the different pins on this. So a timeline allows us to play from the start. We can stop it, we can reverse it, we can reverse it from the end, and we can actually set a new time and change the scale of this timeline, which really fits our use case of needing to adjust our time with our game time speed modifier that we have. When we start playing the timeline, we can actually go off the update pin, and this is where we're going to be adjusting the light. When it's finished, we can call certain things, we can check the direction, and of course, because we created a track, we actually have the output of that track usable for us for any type of math or any sort of thing like that. So what we'd like to do is test it. So what we'd like to do is test out this timeline and make sure the effect works. And the way we're going to do that is go to variables. We're going to create a direction light first. So we're going to say direction light. It's going to be of type direction light object. And in our game world, we can actually, let me compile and save really fast. If I click my actor, the day night manager, over here we can see that there's variables available to us for our light. And what I actually need to do is click the eyeball so we can see it, expose it to the editor. And now if I scroll up to the top, you see direction light, and I can select the direction light that is in our map. So now we have access to the direction light that is part of this third-person map. So back inside here, I'm going to click and drag the direction light. I'm going to right click on it and say convert to validated get, connect the pins to my event. And if it's valid, we want to play our timeline from the start. Now, off the update pin, what we want to do is create a sequence. The sequence node will allow us to run something and then run this one and as many as we need. It's a really easy way in Blueprints to organize sequential code. And so the first thing that we want to do is off the then 0, we want to set the light intensity and then the light temperature. So what we're going to do is grab the direction light. Off that, we want to say lighting component, the light component. This will give you access to being able to set the intensity, connect that to then 0. And then the other thing that we want to do is set the temperature and then connect that pin to the then 1. So now that we can set the intensity and we can set the temperature, you might be wondering how we actually go about adjusting these values. And that's where the timeline comes into play. We are going to use the lighting track, which is part of the timeline, to actually adjust these values for intensity and for our temperature. But before we do that, I want to go to the third person map and show you the values that we're actually going to be adjusting. So in the outliner, we have direction light and we have intensity here. You can see it's at 3.0 lux. And let's say I lower this to 2. You can see the world got a little darker. Hopefully it shows up. Let's go to 0.5. And you can see just overall our light, the world is a little darker, but it still doesn't look exactly how we want. So another way you can do this is by adjusting the temperature. So let's say we adjust the temperature to 3,500, and it makes it a little bit more golden color. Maybe we want it to be 5,000. Overall, our world just looks a little darker. And so what we want to do is adjust these values in order to make a day-night transition. So let's go back into our day-night manager. And the first thing that we want to do is go to our sunset timeline, and we have a lighting track in here. What we'd like to do is add a couple keys to this. So if you right click on the graph, you can say add key, and we're going to adjust the time to 0, and then we're going to set the value to 1. I'm going to right click again, add key, and we're going to set this one to 5 and then 0. So this is a linear line, you can see it here, that goes from 1 to 0 over 5 seconds long. And these are adjustable, and you can adjust this graph to make the lighting effect more dramatic or ease as you need. So if you compile and save, let's go back to the event graph and do a little bit of math. I'm going to grab the lighting track, and from this, we're going to use the multiply node. I'm going to duplicate this because we want to do this twice. We're going to do it one for the intensity, and then we want to do it once for the temperature. So I'm going to click the lighting track, click and drag it into the multiplication. From here, we want to multiply this bottom one for the temperature to be the maximum we have, which is 6,500. And then for this one, we also want to multiply by 3, which is the maximum that we would want it as. And I got those numbers again from our direction light. You can see 6,500 is the temperature and intensity is 3 lux. Let's go back in here. So as our lighting value goes from 1 to 0, we're going to be multiplying by 3 to give us a percentage of that value between 0 and 3. What we want to do is clamp that value. So we're going to say clamp, and we're looking for clamp float. And then the return pin from the clamp we're going to set as our new intensity. I'm going to copy this clamp, and we're going to paste it here and connect our value for our temperature, and then connect the return value to our new temperature. So this is where we can make some adjustments, our min and max. For me, I think the good min is 0.25, and then our max, we'll keep it at 3. For our temperature, I don't really like adjusting this too much, so we're going to set it at 4,500. It gives us a little bit of a yellow hint because the sun is setting, but it doesn't get too yellow, and keeps the world nice and dark. And then for this, we're going to set the maximum to 6,500. So now, as our timeline begins, we're going to set our intensity, and we're going to set our temperature, and it's going to slowly adjust the sun in our world. Make sure that isValid is connected to play from start. And at the top, what we want to do is after the get variable, we want to call on game time evening and disconnect the bind to event. And this is just so that we can make sure that our lighting effect is working. Click compile and save, and then we'll go back to our third person map and press play. You can see the world's changing color. It's getting a little darker. And now we've created a day-night cycle. Pretty cool. It's a very simple lighting effect, but it gets the job done. So now let's go ahead and actually connect it to our time that you see here on the left. Go back into the day-night manager, and all we have to do is disconnect this pin. We can get rid of this node. I hit delete on my keyboard and connect the set to the bind event. Now this event is bound to our game time component. And what that means is when we hit the 1700 hour mark, or the 17-hour mark, excuse me, our event should run. So let's compile and save and test it out. You can see our time is incrementing here, and we'll wait until it turns to 1700. I'm going to fast forward briefly. So we're about to be at 17, and you can see now that our game world is changing. It's becoming nighttime. So what's great about this is now that it's dark, you can, and I think this is something you should try after this video, is actually create the morning event, which is a very similar effect. And the only thing different here is that you actually just reverse this entire effect, and you say reverse from the end. That makes it very reusable, and customizable. Okay, so one other thing that we need to do to make sure that this is working with our game time component is adjust the speed of this timeline based on the game time speed modifier that we have inside our component. And the way we do that is by we can adjust the scale of our timeline. Or excuse me, the way we do that is we can adjust the play rate of our timeline. So when this event is called, what we want to do is get our game state. We're going to get our component. So we'll say get game time component. We want to get the scale. So we're going to look for get game time scale. From here, again, we want to set the play rate. So once I have this, I'm going to click over here under components and you see sunset timeline. I'm going to click and drag get. And here I'm going to say set play rate. I'm going to connect this in line here, then connect it to my validated get. We'll then set our play rate. So there's another really cool way we could adjust this. If we don't want to do this whole, this part where we get the game time scale, we could actually pass it into the event. And the way we do that is by going to game state, we go to, going to our game time component, we go to our game time evening, we can add an input at the top, which will be our game time scale. You can then pass in the current game time scale when this event goes off, and you can then trigger, input that from the event node into the set play rate node here. So once that's done, our timeline will change, will vary based on the rate that we pass in. And what's interesting is that our timeline's at 5 seconds. So in normal time, it takes 5 seconds for the sun to set. When we speed it up, it should be faster. And then when we slow it down, it should be a little bit slower. To test out our changes, we want to verify the speed changes. So if I hit 2 on my keyboard, we should adjust our speed and our sun should set faster. So I'm going to go to the third person map and press play. I'll speed up the time with 2. And we can see as soon as we hit 1700, it slowed down, and as soon as we hit 1700, our sun set, and it set faster than normal. If I press play and we get close to that time, we'll go back to normal time in here just a second. We can see that normally it's a lot slower of adjustment, but because our time was faster, the transition happened faster. And the same would be if we slow it down, and that's because of the play rate that we set with our game time scale. So we've created a simple day-night cycle. It's adjusting the color temperature and intensity of our direction light in our game world, and it's triggered by an event that originates from our game time component that is set up on a custom game state class. We added functionality that we can speed up and slow down our time. We can even pause it, and the speeding up time, the scale, is part of our adjustment for our day-night cycle. So the way you can expand this and make it better or grow, or the way you can expand this and make it even more complex is by adding more events. You can listen for speed up events. You can listen for the game pause events. You can do more things with visually. You can change the light color. You can play around with different lighting track color transitions. So if I add a color track, part of our timeline, you can actually set up a gradient and shift the color of the light between the orange, red, and yellow, which again just creates a really cool effect in the game world, but it's really up to you on how you want to customize it. What we've done is we've set up a good framework to build on top of and continue iterating to make sure whatever you have in your project fits what you need. So hopefully if you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and let me know down in the comments below what you'd like to learn next.